Mathieu, a seasoned business consultant, pulled his car up to the imposing facade of l'Hôtel des Ombres. The headlights of his car cast eerie shadows on the old Gothic structure, making it look even more foreboding. He had heard stories about this place, whispers of its haunted past, but he had always dismissed them as mere legends. The building loomed, a Gothic monolith against the stormy twilight sky. The dark clouds seemed to gather around it, as if drawn to its ancient, mysterious aura. He was here for a week-long conference, a retreat of sorts for his firm. The idea was to combine work with a bit of relaxation, but the atmosphere of the place made him doubt the latter. Mathieu stepped out of his car, a shiver running down his spine despite the summer humidity. He couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched, that unseen eyes were following his every move. The air felt heavy, stagnant. It was as if time itself had stopped around this place, trapping it in a perpetual state of decay. An unsettling feeling washed over him. He had been to many old hotels before, but none had ever made him feel this way. He entered the hotel. The ornate lobby, strangely deserted. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Dust motes danced in the faint light, filtering through grimy chandeliers. It was as if the very air was alive, whispering secrets of the past. The air hung thick with the scent of decay, and something else, something unidentifiable, yet unsettling. It was a smell that hinted at long-forgotten memories and hidden stories. Mathieu approached the check-in counter, his unease growing with each step. The dim lighting made it hard to see clearly, adding to the sense of mystery. The elderly clerk behind the counter, his face etched with countless stories, looked up with a vacant stare. His eyes seemed to pierce through Mathieu, as if seeing into his very soul.
Monsieur Dubois?
His voice rasped, dry and brittle, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It was a voice that had seen many years and many sorrows. Mathieu nodded, trying to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He couldn't shake off the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger, something that would change him forever. The elevator groaned as it ascended, the dim lights flickering intermittently. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic whirring of the ancient machinery. Mathieu felt a growing sense of unease. He was alone, utterly alone in the vast, silent hotel. He pressed his hand against the cool brass railing, the metal slick beneath his fingers. Stepping out onto his floor, he was met with a long, dimly lit corridor. The thick carpet muffled his footsteps, amplifying the unnerving silence. The air felt colder here, heavier. He found his room at the end of the hallway, its door ajar. Cautiously, Mathieu pushed the door open. The room was dark and musty, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight. He fumbled for the light switch, but nothing happened. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He could have sworn he heard a faint whisper, a sigh carried on the stale air. Sleep came in fitful bursts, plagued by unsettling dreams. Mathieu's mind was a battlefield, where shadows and whispers waged war against his peace. Every time he closed his eyes, he was pulled into a vortex of eerie visions and haunting sounds. Each time he drifted off, the whispers returned, swirling around him like the shadows that danced in the corners of his room. They were unintelligible, yet filled with a sense of urgency and dread, as if they were trying to convey a dire warning. Then, a new sound pierced the oppressive silence. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing down the hallway outside his door. They were heavy, each step resonating with a sense of purpose, as if someone, or something, was approaching with intent. Mathieu lay frozen in his bed, his heart pounding against his ribs. He could feel the blood rushing in his ears, drowning out all other sounds. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but fear clouded his thoughts. The footsteps stopped right outside his room. He held his breath, listening intently. The silence that followed was deafening, amplifying his anxiety. He strained to hear any hint of movement, any clue as to what was lurking just beyond the door. The doorknob rattled. A wave of terror washed over him, cold and paralyzing. He felt as though he was trapped in a nightmare, unable to move or cry out for help. The room seemed to close in around him, the air thick with tension. Then, just as suddenly as they had begun, the footsteps retreated, fading into the silence. The relief was palpable, but it was short-lived. The sense of unease lingered, a constant reminder that the danger had not truly passed. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The room felt alive with unseen eyes, scrutinizing his every move. He shivered, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. He got out of bed, drawn to the antique mirror that hung on the wall. It seemed to beckon him, its surface shimmering in the dim light. He approached it cautiously, his reflection growing clearer with each step. It was an ornate thing, its silver backing tarnished with age. The intricate designs on its frame told stories of a bygone era, adding to its mysterious allure. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cool surface. As he looked into its depths, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing behind him, a fleeting shadow in the periphery of his vision. His heart skipped a beat, and he spun around, but the room was empty. The mirror, however, seemed to hold secrets that he was only beginning to uncover. The following morning, Mathieu found himself drawn to the hotel's deserted bar. He needed a drink, something strong to settle his nerves. As he sat there, nursing his cognac, a figure materialized on the stool beside him. The man was old, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and time. He wore a threadbare suit, his eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. "You shouldn't be here. This place, it's not right. Leave while you still can." Mathieu tried to dismiss the old man's warning as the ramblings of a senile mind, but the fear in his eyes was palpable. "Mathieu, what do you mean?" Mathieu asked, his voice betraying his growing unease. The old man leaned closer, his breath hot and stale against Mathieu's ear. "They watch, they wait, and they don't let go easily." Before Mathieu could press him further, the old man stood, his presence vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The second night was worse. The whispers returned, louder this time, slithering through the walls like venomous snakes. They seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, whispering his name, taunting him. Sleep was an impossibility. He tossed and turned in his bed, the sheets tangled around his legs. He could feel his sanity slipping, the darkness closing in. He needed to get out of this room, out of this hotel. Driven by a primal fear, Mathieu stumbled out of bed and towards the mirror. He needed to see if the shadow was still there, if he was truly losing his mind. As he stared into the mirror, his reflection flickered, distorted. The face staring back at him was no longer his own. It was a grotesque mockery, its features twisted into a horrifying grin. The eyes, cold and lifeless, stared back at him with an unsettling familiarity. Panic seized him, a cold, unrelenting grip that tightened with every passing second. He had to get out, escape the suffocating confines of l'Hôtel des Ombres. The walls seemed to close in on him, pressing down with an invisible weight. He raced out of his room and into the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest like a drumbeat of terror. Each step felt like a desperate plea for freedom, but the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before him, the walls closing in, the air thick with dread. It was as if the hotel itself was alive, a malevolent entity intent on keeping him prisoner. He ran, his breath catching in his throat, the sound of his own footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Each echo was a reminder of his isolation, his entrapment. He tried door after door, but they were all locked, their surfaces cold and unyielding beneath his touch. He was trapped, a prisoner of the hotel's dark embrace. The shadows in the corners seemed to writhe and twist, taking on monstrous shapes that danced just beyond the reach of the flickering gaslights. They whispered secrets of despair and doom. The whispers intensified, taunting him with his impending doom. They were voices of the past, of those who had been trapped before him, their fates sealed by the hotel's sinister will. He was lost, consumed by the labyrinthine corridors of the hotel. Each turn led to another dead end, another reminder of his hopeless situation. He stumbled and fell, his hands scraping against the rough carpet. The pain was a cruel reminder of his reality, a reality he couldn't escape. He looked back over his shoulder, his blood running cold. The figure from the mirror, the one with his face, was gliding towards him, its smile widening with each passing moment. The figure from the mirror, the one with his face, was gliding towards him, its smile widening with each passing moment. It was a twisted reflection of his own fear, a manifestation of the hotel's dark power. Mathieu scrambled to his feet, his legs heavy with terror. He had to confront the shadow, face the horror that awaited him. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that there was no escaping l'Hôtel des Ombres. He turned to face his pursuer, his breath ragged in his chest. The figure stopped a few feet away, its eyes, his eyes, boring into him with an unholy light. It reached out a hand, its touch promising oblivion. "Who are you?" Mathieu croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "You!" it hissed, its voice a chorus of whispers. Mathieu stumbled back, his hand connecting with the cold, hard surface of the wall. He was trapped, with nowhere left to run. As the figure approached, its shadow enveloping him, Mathieu closed his eyes and embraced the inevitable. The darkness that greeted him was not the peaceful oblivion of sleep. He felt himself changing, his form shifting, his essence merging with the shadows that clung to the walls of l'Hôtel des Ombres. He was no longer Mathieu Dubois, the business consultant. He was part of the hotel now, another lost soul bound to its cursed halls. The whispers no longer tormented him. They were his now, a symphony of despair echoing through the corridors. He was home. The following morning, a new figure greeted the arriving guests at l'Hôtel des Ombres. He was tall and slender, with a vacant smile etched upon his face. His eyes, once filled with fear and life, were now empty, reflecting the darkness that had consumed him. He moved with an eerie grace, his footsteps silent on the plush carpets. He was a ghost in a gilded cage, forever bound to the hotel that had claimed his soul.
And as he greeted the new arrivals with a chillingly polite bow, he couldn't help but wonder if they too would succumb to the allure of l'Hôtel des Ombres.